All right, guys, welcome back to the show. This is part 2 of my conversation with Jamie Mustard. And if you've listened to part 1, you cannot wait for me to dive into this segment of the episode. So I'm just going to shut up. We're going to get after it. This is part 2 of my unbelievable conversation about curing and stopping chronic pain, PTSD, and trauma associated with all of the things that we're all going through and experiencing. So guys, here you go. I know you're going to love it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're a patient. You've had this procedure done. Describe to me pre and post, right? Like what's the, I'm assuming there's a, is it, I don't know. I can't, the right question won't come out of my mouth, but I think you're going to answer it probably very appropriately. Like, what was it like? Like, what was it like before you had the procedure done, after the procedure done? And then when you say like 80 to 90% effective, does that mean that you're still experiencing that somebody who's had this done moments or bouts of the PTSD?
No, I mean, listen, it's not a lobotomy. Okay?
Right.
Okay. Basically, no, it means that, it doesn't work in 10 to 15% of people.
Okay.
Okay. And it's a spectrum, like a broken leg is a spectrum. You can have a fracture or you can have a tib-fib break. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So like the worst case I ever saw was a Delta Force guy. I scanned who led the mission that captured Saddam Hussein, and he was a Black Hawk Down survivor. I sent him and his wife to Chicago. I scanned their brains at Amen Clinic. I did this procedure on them over 2 days, scanned his brain less than 24 hours later. Okay. And what the forensic psychiatrist saw in the brain scan made his mouth drop open. He would normally see that after 2 years of no drugs and alcohol, 6 months of hyperbaric, all sorts of supplements. Like this guy got more further in a day and a half than you could get in years.
That's amazing. So Jamie, just so people understand, like, so when you look at the brain, like under an fMRI, like somebody who's experiencing the trauma, is the brain kind of lit up like a Christmas tree?
The amygdala is lit up like a Christmas tree, and that's relative. So what you're going to see if somebody didn't have, childhood trauma, but just had a parent that needled them or didn't love them the way they wanted, or they were bullied for too long. Okay. In the last 2 years, I sent 10 of my wealthy, white privileged CEO friends that didn't have trauma in their minds, but had the symptoms, and one for one. Okay. It transformed them. And I can give you individual stories there.
Wow.
One guy, he called me a millionaire CEO. He called me right before he went and told me his wife was really angry at me because I convinced him to go, and she was going, and she thought, well, and I was their friend. I would go over to their house for dinner. She's like really upset. I said, why is she upset at me? She said, well, you convinced me to go and do this weird Vanilla Sky-like thing in Chicago. She's pissed. And they went. By the afternoon, she said to him, "You're different."
Oh, wow. And
now she's going back for it with her daughter.
That's awesome.
Okay. But the answer in terms of as a patient is like, you go in, you lie down, you can do twilight, but they do a local anesthetic. You can't really feel it. It just feels like a pinch. But he uses a guided ultrasound to get to the right nerves. He puts in the anesthetic, it turns the nerves off. You go to post-op, takes 5 minutes, 7 minutes. 10 minutes later, you start to feel it come back on. Okay. And there's different reactions, but when you're running from a tiger, you're not going to be experiencing love, joy. There's a lot of emotions you can't experience, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So a lot of people like these Delta Force guys, these Navy SEAL guys, they wake up crying.
Yeah.
Because they're feeling emotion for the first time in 20 years. I just got
goosebumps when you said that. That's so cool.
I hate to show those videos where these guys wake up because you don't know they haven't been drugged, and they're so joyful and crying. They look like they're on drugs, but they haven't had any drug.
Right.
They just had a nerve, a series of nerves in their neck turned off and turned on. They're not under any drug, right?
Yeah.
It's like taking a pain medication. People don't get euphoric from that, right? So yeah, but for me, this would be a really good way to explain it. I was with a friend and we went to the Chicago Art Museum after I did it. We were walking back downtown Chicago, from the Chicago Art Museum to the hotel. And I was with this friend of mine, and we're in the inner city where I grew up, a city, and I'm used to that. It's where I grew up. I'm very comfortable in that environment. And I see this section, we walk through the section of town, there's all these kind of hustler guys, and they're marking us. We look relatively affluent, and they're giving us the eye, like, are these guys people that we can get money? Who knows what's going on in their mind?
Yeah.
Well, because I grew up in that environment, and I was like trying to kind of relax. I was getting tired. I was going back to the hotel. I was typically, if I get into a situation where I feel like someone's doing that to me because I grew up around it, I can get very judgmental and it angers me that somebody is marking me. And when I looked at these guys, I didn't feel anger. All I saw was overactive. All I saw was their biology. All I saw was their overactive sympathetic system. And all I felt was compassion.
Wow.
And in terms of how I move through the world, I have an incredibly, a job that has a lot of pressures to it. Bringing in a medical innovation that can change the world has pressures to it.
Sure.
It pisses people off. Okay.
Yeah.
Most people not, but some,
Yeah.
if you've been doing talk therapy for 10 years, you don't necessarily want to hear that it's been biological. A lot of it's been biological the whole time. Right. So there's all sorts of ways people react to it. Most of the time they react to, I need to buy this book and I need to get there right now. That's how most people react to it. So most of the news is good. Right. But yeah, just in every situation in life, I'm watching a movie and I can experience joy, and I can cry in a movie, or I can, when I'm connecting with another human being, or when I really get difficult news, that feeling of being overwhelmed by my body doesn't exist. I'm just there looking at the news. And so things like that, you can go, well, he's calmer, he's cooler. But, I call that moment of experiencing something that's hard to experience and not reacting. Sometimes I like to call that the God moment, because what you do in that moment where you react and get into that argument with your partner or your spouse or yell at your kids over time is very destructive and very harmful, and actually can cause secondary post-traumatic stress, secondary trauma. So when you remove that, you can be removing generational trauma from your family. That's powerful.
Wow. Very powerful.
Yeah.
Jamie, I'm just thinking of a couple of questions that the listeners might have. So is this a one and done thing? Like, get it done once in your life and then forever, or you're good, or is it maybe something you need to get done again? And then are there any concerns about like side effects or things of that nature?
Okay. So on the one and done answer to that question is, if you get re-traumatized, you're going to have to go redo it. Okay.
Gotcha.
In most cases, it's permanent, lasting for years, if not permanent, but everyone's different. There's an epigenetic factor. If you come from like a long line of generational trauma, you may need to go back and get it again. Right. But in most cases, you see permanent relief from these symptoms that I named. And everybody's different, and some people do go back and get additional, they have to get it redone. But every time in that case, it gets less and less each time. And it's not very expensive compared to all the other things one could do over time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure,
and right now they're doing, the Army's been studying this for years and been proving it. And there's not a lot of question that it's working, because the Army's doing so many of them. They're always the leader when it comes to stuff like this.
Right.
But right now they're doing this fMRI study at NYU, which makes it incontrovertible. And that's and this kind of goes to your earlier question, like what you would see in the brain is, if I did an fMRI on your brain, I'd see all this overactivity in your amygdala. I do this treatment on you over 1 or 2 days. I give you an fMRI the next day. All of that overactivity in the amygdala is gone.
Jamie, question, and you'll probably be able to answer this. With the amygdala in the brain, like that activity center, somebody who has had a traumatic experience, like the prolonged and/or the situational trauma, is the amygdala consistently lit up like that? Like,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not something that subsides on its own. I'm just asking questions.
Listen, like if you have somebody that's a yoga instructor, and a lot of people go into yoga because they're trying to mitigate their nervous system.
Yeah.
They're going to be calming it, and they might ebb it and flow it. Diet, exercise, not drinking, not smoking, things that cause toxicity in the brain, brain toxicity and traumatic brain injury exacerbated.
Okay.
Okay. So, if you look at somebody like, an Aaron Hernandez and an OJ, what you see there, when you see somebody that has TBI or brain toxicity, if you look at what drugs and alcohol, and this is data science, do to your brain in terms of blood flow and agitation, it's not so much different than somebody coming back from war. You're going to see, if someone does a lot of drugs and alcohol, you're going to see decreased blood flow to the frontal cortex.
Right.
If you have somebody that's been in concussive war, you're going to see decreased blood flow to the frontal cortex.
Yeah.
So when you have somebody like an OJ or a Aaron Hernandez, they probably have TBI, which is really low blood flow to the frontal cortex, which is your executive function. And then they have this thing where everything's life or death. That's where you see horrible things ensue. But there's so many things in our society that this is permeating. If you take we have all this kind of divisive communication in the streets these days about how we're all different and, all this stuff. And it's mostly, we talk about it mostly in terms of social terms.
Yeah.
I'm somebody that grew up in a slum. I don't see this in terms of social terms at all. I think it's a class thing, but most of all, now I think it's a biological thing. Imagine if you grow up in the stress of poverty. In the neighborhoods where I grew up, 100% of the people have this.
Sure.
100%. If
Sure.
you have to worry about getting beat up after school, your parents aren't around, the stress of not being loved, are you going to be able to cover rent? Are you going to be able to cover the parking ticket you just got? If you're, all the things that poor people deal with, that unless you live it, you can't, people don't know how extreme it is. It's and there's fees for everything, and you're more likely to have a problem that's going to cost you a fee if you're poor, these fees can be life-changing for you. And just the stress of fees when you're poor, to get your car out of impound,
Yeah.
or the boot off. There's just so many things, right?
Have they done any research or any studies, Jamie, on a population just like that?
No, but I don't know that they will. I went into a jail a year and a half ago, a massive jail in the South, to interview murderers to see if they would have the same 7 or 8 symptoms as somebody coming back from Afghanistan. I wanted to see if it was the same, because think about it like this.
Oh, yeah.
Say I'm a guy that grew up in poverty. So I've grown up in that Alexetic Low. I am that guy. Okay. And then I'm a cop or a police officer, and I'm dealing with people every day. And I never know who that guy is going to be that's going to pull a gun on me and shoot me.
Yeah.
And if you're a police officer or first responder, you all know that happens. So
Sure.
Every time you pull somebody over, you're like, well, and you've got a wife and kids, the stress of that every day. So the likelihood is that 90%, 99, if not 100% of first responders and police officers are going to have this. 100% of people growing up in the inner city are going to have this. They get into a routine traffic stop. This system in their neck is telling both of them that this situation, which is completely innocuous, is life or death. And that's why you see all this crazy shit happen, stuff happen, is that their biology is lying to them.
Right.
So I wanted to go into a prison, interview some guy that had committed an impulse crime when he was 20. I did a few, and see what the symptoms were. And it was the exact same 7 symptoms, 9 symptoms of somebody coming back from Afghanistan, 1 for 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Well, this is a weird shift in gears from prison, murder, and those things. But let's talk about weight loss, Jamie. Let's talk about.
Well, I would like to learn from you, a little bit.
Yeah.
What I would tell you is that when you look up operator syndrome, there's a cascade of physiological symptoms that come from that. I have a guy that I work with on the book. I actually dedicated the book to him. His name is one of the people I dedicated the book to. His name is Corey Drayton, and he is a guy that just beat stage 4 terminal cancer. And he 100% believes that he got that because he was not expressing himself. He was always repressing his feelings.
Yeah.
Okay. And so if this guy grew up upper class in England with a family that maybe didn't give him, where he was treated not very well, like a piece of property by his parents. Not like kids should be seen, not heard, not hugged, not loved. but again, goes to like a fancy public school in England, on the surface has everything that you think is affluence. I mean, part of what drove me to this is when I grew up poor and then I went to the London School of Economics, people say, well, how do you grow up poor, not going to school, and then go to a school like that? I was obsessed because I thought if ignorance and poverty mean pain, then education and affluence must mean joy. That's what drove me. And I got there, and then all these rich kids, the sons of prime ministers, whatever I'm going to school with, these guys are more fucked up than the people I grew up with. And it was like, go fish on my motivation. It wasn't until I met Dr. Lipov 25 years later and that I understood why these guys were just as or more messed up. The sympathetic nervous system doesn't think. It doesn't have a brain connected to it. It's apathetic. It only reacts. So to go back to weight loss, right? So there's a host of triggers. If you're constantly aroused, I'll ask you as a diet and fitness instructor, how are your cortisol levels in your body going to be?
100% elevated and off the charts. Yeah,
okay.
You're going to be,
Is it harder or easier to lose weight if your cortisol is jacked?
Undeniably harder.
Yeah. So if your adrenals are jacked, your cortisol's jacked, all these your endocrine system is jacked.
You're screwed.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, we'll turn it around for a second, Jay, is as a guy, like I got when I was checking you, kind of reading I really like the way you messaged about like getting out of the yo-yo system, really kind of confronting why are you, because not eating poorly and doing activities that keep you from exercising are in my opinion, often arising from trying to regulate your sympathetic system.
Sure.
You're eating food, you're getting a dopamine hit, right? So people are trying to regulate. We all have every kind of addiction you can imagine, right? So people are trying to regulate. So I'm curious, like what your process is. Are you only taking, like, when you look at somebody and you're working with them to get on a diet, is that kind of like a mind approach? Like, well, what have you been through and why are you doing that? Is that how you do it?
Yeah. So my phrase is this, Jamie. I use weight loss and wellness and fitness as a way to get somebody into my world, because my first book's called The Overweight Mind. And so it's all the psychological reasons why somebody struggles with weight loss. Has nothing to do with, eat this, don't eat that, this workout's better than that workout. Like, all that is secondary. And so I get people into my world, and then I start to tap into the real reasons why they're struggling. And it has nothing to do with potato chips or hot dogs or cookies or, they want to sit on the couch and watch TV. It is 99.9763% always something psychological.
Okay. So here's my question for you. I was thinking about this when I was reading this. Okay. So here's my question for you. Okay. I basically come in on the discussion we've been having in this interview, and there's no wrong or right answer to this. I really just want to get your, because I don't live in your space.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious person. So I really want to know how somebody like you would process this. So basically what we're doing, this is almost like, I was almost surprised you had us on in a way, because basically what I'm coming along and doing in this interview in a way, Jay, is I'm coming and saying, hey, Jay, all these people that you're working with these psychological issues, and I 100% agree with you in a way, but I would think that maybe the majority of those psychological issues might be being caused by a physical injury to their body that they can't control. What do you think of that? And does that jibe or completely interrupt the way that you think of working with somebody?
I would agree with you 9.95 times out of 10, 100%. I think there's always an outlier. You know what I mean? There's always that, there's always that one person. It's like, just blah, blah, blah. But most people, I would agree with everything you said. And this is right up my alley. So when I got this notification, like, from Jimmy, he's like, hey, I'm like, this is absolutely, I want to have these guys on. Like, this is right up. This doesn't debunk anything that I teach, preach, anything. Like, I would, I'm going to recommend every one of my clients read The Invisible Machine, do the research, take the quiz, do the things. And if it resonates with them, let's do the procedure. Right? I think of myself, you've been talking about this whole thing. My father got killed when I was 5 years old. And so I grew up in an I always tell people I've lived two lives, two versions. From the time I was 5 until I was 25, And then from the time I was like 25 on, I'm 40, I'll be 49 this year. I lived in a world of what I consider just chaos. So my dad got killed when I was 5. Between that time and the time I was 25, I lost my 2 other fatherly figures. And then when I was 25, my best friend put a shotgun in his mouth and killed himself. So I experienced a massive amount of trauma in that time. And I, obviously, everything you've just said, like, had no ability to express my emotions. Like, anger was my first reaction to anything and everything.
Which is fight.
Yeah, 100%. I lived in fight mode.
Yeah.
I lived, because I'm a fighter. Like, I lived in fight mode from 5 to 25. And I mean, I'm talking, my brother's 6 years older than me, and majority of my time was spent defending myself against him because he was in fight mode. He didn't know how to behave or react. So we just beat the living shit out of each other for 20 years. And then verbally, physically, mentally, like, I lived in this chaotic state. And it wasn't until I don't even know how it happened. Like, I wish I would have known about this a lot sooner, that I was able to, like, somehow extract myself from that. And I'm sure I'm still dealing with a lot of that.
Well, if you eat non-inflammatory foods, and you exercise all the time, you understand how the body works, you're going to be able to greatly mitigate against this.
Yeah.
Especially
and so
if you're not,
And that's what I did, Jamie. I dedicated my life to, and you said earlier about holding on to trauma. I've got psoriatic arthritis in my hands. I mean, you can see my pinkies don't straighten out. I'm a firm believer that this is because of that. Like, this is not because I'm supposed to have arthritis.
If Dr. Lipov was here, he would explain how that it discombobulates the immune system, destroys the scavenger system in the body. So it autoimmune disease, cancer, what you have. I mean, your hands look like you're just white knuckled, right?
100%. Yeah.
So I would be curious. I mean, and your story is incredible, Jay. Like, I would just be curious if this explains a lot in terms of what you see in your clients.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's walked me through my life, and then I have clients going through the carousel of my brain. I'm like, okay, yes. It makes 100% sense. And that's what I do, Jamie, is, like, when somebody comes in, like, normally if you go to a health and fitness and weight loss guy, the first questions they're going to ask are, Jamie, tell me about your diet. Tell me about whatever. And I do those things, but I'm listening to how they speak versus what they speak. I listen to the words they use to describe themselves. I listen to the words they use to describe the world, right? Like, and what I'll find is that most people use words like, they'll say, well, I've had the most catastrophic day, or I've had you know what I mean? Like, they'll use language of someone who is inside of a traumatic event. And the traumatic event was that Starbucks was just simply out of almond milk today. But for them, they will describe it as if they have just experienced, a 27 car pileup on the interstate, because they're living in that world of fight mode, and or flight mode, and they're simply using food. I always say food is just your weapon of choice. You've just decided to use food as your weapon to try to mitigate some of those feelings. Some people use drugs, some people use alcohol, some people gamble, some people, like you said earlier, we all have an addictive personality. How are you, stimulating and or destimulating that addiction using other things?
I asked Gabor Mate one time why we're so judgmental of addicts.
Yeah.
And he said, because we all have it on some level. For him, he said it was classical music CDs, but we all have some minor addiction. So when we judge an extreme addict, it makes us feel lesser.
Well, yeah, it makes my addiction not so crazy. But Jamie, I'd much rather judge you than I would judge myself. I mean, that's just human behavior. Like,
exactly. So so I don't, it's completely changed the way I move through the world, to experience the world. What I would say for you, because you and I are very similar in certain ways, is, I was a fighter. Would agree. A special forces commander one time called me pathologically aggressive. And when you get that from the guy that was responsible for neutralizing ISIS in Syria, maybe you have some soul searching to do.
I was about to say, Jimmy, I don't know if that's the greatest compliment you've ever gotten, but
yeah. So, but what I would say to you is, you're experiencing what I was experiencing, which is living life punching through a paper bag. What made me finally seek help was getting successful. Because I kept like, I would always have another thing. First, it was getting around the people that are away from how I grew up, and that would solve it. That didn't solve it. Okay, well, that didn't solve it. But if I achieve my dreams, then I'll be happy. And then finally, 7 or 8 years ago, I started to get into the kind of success that I thought I was worthy of. And I was more miserable than I'd ever been. And I was like, this is completely fucked. Okay. And so I didn't do all this so I can feel uncomfortable in my body. And that's when I started looking at alternatives, looking for things. And I was lucky that I shared a literary agent with a woman named Dr. Shauna Springer, who was at TAPS at the time. But now she is the chief psychology officer at the Stella Center. And she started telling me about that work. And so it made sense to me. And then I had become friends with this guy named Dr. John Faber, who runs the Encino Clinic of Amen. And he's probably the leading forensic psychiatrist in the United States. I asked him about it. He was a fan of my other book, which is like an art business book. And I said, hey man, do you know about this thing? He said, oh, I don't. And then I said, well, could you vet it for me? And he was the one that vetted it for me. I said, can you give me a way to assess whether I was in fight or flight all the time. So I almost backed out 100 times because I thought I was so freaked out. I thought it would take away my edge as an artist.
Right.
I needed my angst. It freed me up.
Yeah.
Right. But he basically sent me some papers and then a way to assess it. He's like, well, what's the risk? 0, because they've been doing it. The shot was developed in 1925 and they're doing it with an ultrasound. I mean, nothing is risk-free, but in terms of medical procedures go, this is up there. This is like up there with like getting a cavity, done.
Right.
And then what's the upside? What's the downside? So it was all up, no down, no dependency. So when he gave me that as a construct to evaluate it, I made the decision to go. But it was not easy. I braved COVID. There was nobody on the plane. And I went to downtown Chicago. But the last thing I'll say is like the thing that really, took me a year to convince a friend of mine who grew up, who was the grandson of a billionaire that had these symptoms, close friend. And he didn't have childhood trauma in the typical sense.
Yeah.
Okay. But he was not a happy guy and he wasn't connected to his feelings. Anyway, I don't know if you want to hear we're probably running out of time, but like,
no.
Okay. But this guy, I convinced him to go. He had kids and he kind of backed out a couple times because of issues with the kids. And one time I was landing in Chicago and it was like, I'm not going to make it. There's a storm here and I'm not going to be able to get back to Florida or whatever. The third time he was there. Left side, right side, they always do the right side first, is adult trauma. Before puberty, left side is childhood trauma. We don't know why. Okay, so this guy did the right side. I didn't think that was going to do anything for him because he had childhood stress. His father, who is the son of this billionaire, grew up entitled, became a drug addict, and died young, leaving my friend without a father. But he didn't see himself as having trauma. And now he had kids, and he was like, so I'm with his wife, who's my friend. He's like, this didn't do anything for me. After he does the right side, you can only do one side per day. I was like, well, you can do the left tomorrow. I said, maybe I'll do it. I don't even know if I want to do it. Right. So he went in and got the left side. And then I'm waiting with his wife at 8 o'clock in the morning downstairs in this windy January day in Chicago. And I'm with his wife, and the doc, who's now my friend, comes down and she says, and I say, how'd it go? And then the doc says, he says he feels great. And his wife, who I've known for years and years, she bursts into tears. And I go, whoa, wait a second.
Yeah, what's going on?
Yeah, we don't even know if this worked yet. And then she says, Jamie, my husband has not said he's felt great since I've known him.
Oh, wow.
And then the three of us are down there talking. The wife, we're waiting for the guy, the wife, me, and the doctor. This woman comes in, she's got a mask on, but you could tell she's very kind of beautiful. Her eyes are shining, and she sees the doctor. She runs over to him. She leans in and gives him this long hug. Okay. And then she turns to my friend and I, and she says, the miracle man, and runs down to accounting. I said, oh, she must work for you. She work in the accounting department? He goes, no, yesterday, she is one of the worst sexual assault cases I've ever treated. Yesterday, she wouldn't let me touch her or be alone in a room with her. Yesterday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's why I say that this is the most important medical innovation since the discovery of penicillin, and it
Yeah.
dwarfs the polio vaccine in terms of lives. In terms of suicides alone, it dwarfs the polio vaccine in terms of lives it can save.
So the question is this, Jamie, what do you see? I mean, obviously you believe in this, and listen, I've been talking to you for about an hour. I believe in it too. How do we get this to the level that it should be? Like, what's preventing it from getting that? Is it just information?
I really think it's the fact that it's been associated with the extreme, and that's why we wrote the book. So I think what we do in the book really well is we break down how this thing works into all these incredible modalities that exist out there that we need. Talk therapy works, right? Ketamine works, hyperbaric works. There's also, Amen's puts you on all these incredible brain restoring supplements that work. There's all these things that work, right? But you're doing them over a broken leg. So I think the book really does kind of break it down. But my personal opinion is there's two reasons it hasn't been understood. One is there's a great quote from Max Planck, a Nobel laureate from the 1940s. Daniel Amen shared that with me, actually, that quote that says medical innovation is won in funerals. Right? So you have to wait for your opponents to die. Right. So I thought when I became friends with the doctor that we could use art. Art is an accelerant. It amplifies and accelerates everything. You can make something that would take 40 years, take four months with them if the art is powerful enough. It's just a very powerful tool to permeate people. So the book is narrative. It has incredible true life stories, but they're beautiful. It's a beautiful narrative and a lot of science. And it can help you understand this in relation to you, yourself, and your body. And so to me, what the book does is it takes it away from a 9/11 first responder and a Navy SEAL and a Delta Force guy, and all those guys need this, and it brings it into the living room. And getting how it understands in society with the every person, that's what changes the game.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dude, that's just so cool, man. Like I don't know, I've got so many thoughts going through my brain at this stage of our conversation, but I mean, this is something that I believe, should be a household,
Yeah, it should be as popular as Botox and LASIK. Yeah. Can I give like one last story of why it hasn't been taken on?
Let me ask you this. Why would I say no to that, Jamie?
Well, this is not like it. There's a famous story, and a lot of people listening might have heard it, but it's a story that I kind of think is very indicative of people, because a lot of people listening might be going, God, if this is that, if it can really do that, how come nobody knows about it? And they hear it, and this is when people tell me that, this is the story I tell them. There was a guy in 1860s in Germany or Austria named Semmelweis. Have you heard of this guy?
Semmelweis?
Semmelweis.
No.
Okay. And at that time in Europe, you were 5 times, if you were a mother, you were 5 times more likely to die during childbirth if your baby was born in a hospital as opposed to being born at home. And they didn't know why. Okay. They didn't know why. So this guy Semmelweis, this doctor, he was a physician.
Okay.
He had a theory. Okay. And at that time, they thought germs were carried in the air, like odors were germs. This is what they believed at the time. Well, Semmelweis had this theory. Semmelweis started to think that germs he started to have this idea of microbes. And what was happening in hospitals and where people were dying during childbirth and women, is that these guys would be cutting up cadavers or doing a surgery, and then they'd run over to deliver the baby. And back then they didn't wash their hands. Okay. So Semmelweis, he goes on this kick. He's like, he starts writing papers. He starts doing lectures all over Europe. Like, we got to start washing our hands.
Right.
Okay. For his trouble, he was put into a mental institution where he was beaten to death 6 weeks later. 20 years later, the scientist, I can't think of his name right now, would prove that his assumption was right. Yeah. Right. So when you ask the doctor, like, has it been hard for 20 years, getting people to understand this simple thing that makes so much obvious sense, that is behind so much of our pain? He says, well, I'm not Semmelweis. That's what he would say. Yeah. So, but I believe that this book can help people to understand how it relates to them in the living room. And I believe that this book over time can change the game. The same, I almost see it as a sequel to Body Keeps the Score. If the body keeps the score, the sympathetic nervous system is the scorekeeper.
The invisible machine. Let's make sure everybody goes out and gets that, downloads it. However you read books, get on it.
I appreciate that. You know, I normally don't promote books. When I'm doing a media tour, I typically just promote the ideas. But in this case, I don't mind it being promoted because I want people to understand what's going on inside their body.
Well, I agree. And I think I'm thinking about how people react and respond, Jamie. And it's like the simple thing for people to do right now is going to be able to say, I'm okay. Like, I'm good. Right. Like it's not that big of a deal, blah, blah, blah. They're going to try to disassociate themselves from any kind of, who wants to walk around saying like, hey, I've got trauma, right? Like I've got this thing. Right. If you haven't, because you said earlier, like if it's not extreme enough, and I would do the same thing. Like if you said earlier, I said, hey, Jamie, you know, my dad got killed when I was 5 in a car wreck and blah, blah, blah. The first thing out of your mouth is, oh, I'm sorry. I've tried to avoid that statement my entire life. When somebody says I'm sorry, it makes me cringe because I've associated myself with somebody who I don't need you to tell me I'm sorry.
Well, let me just comment on that, Jay. Like, listen, man. You know, where I grew up and how I grew up, the worst possible thing you could ever be was a victim.
Me too.
So the reason I never associated with my health through trauma, even though I grew up in and out of institutional environments, was abandoned by my parents. I mean, things you can't even imagine, pressures that most people can't imagine. And the reason I think, you know, the only reason, the existential reason I can think I survived it is I survived it to be able to maybe have empathy for things that other people couldn't see or have empathy for. And that's the existential way that I choose to approach what I survived. Okay.
Yeah.
But when I hear you say that, what I think is, you know, is like you can, you know, it's like being called a victim or being told you're sorry. Like, listen, I got my shit dialed. I row my own canoe. I don't need to be told I'm sorry, MF. Okay, right?
Right.
But I'll say this: with everything you're doing. You're like, what I was doing was punching through a paper bag. I was doing everything, punching through discomfort. So if you could go to Chicago or one of the clinics near you, and in 2 days, not be just experiencing a solar existence, at least 80% better, which will feel like 100. My man. You know? Yeah, absolutely.
Listen, I'm open to any and everything that's like that. It makes life better. Right? Like, who cares? I'm not interested in like the length of my life. I'm interested in the quality of it. And I want, the quality of my life, is way more important to me. And so like, I'm interested in anything that makes me, a better version of myself and allows me to do the things that I believe that I was positioned and born to do. So Jamie, I appreciate you, brother. I thank you for coming on, sharing your story, sharing the book, sharing all of this valuable information, and I'm going to do everything.
Yeah. So like you are my target audience. I want somebody like you that's like help, that's doing for others to just be doing what you're doing, but to just do it from a place of where just added ease.
I love that, man.
Yeah.
That's a great way to position it. And Jamie, I'm going to do, like I said, I'm going to do my part, man, to get all the info out there about this, the book, you, Doc, like everything, because I think it's so valuable, so important. So I want to thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for sharing, all this valuable information with us, man.
Thank you, man. You're the everyman. This is the kind of conversation I love. You know what I mean? Like, you're salt of the earth, dude. I really appreciate it. Just like a real conversation.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I will, like I said, I'll do my part, man. I hope to connect with you deeper and on a higher level, because I feel like there's reasons that people get brought into your world, and I want to do everything I can to help you guys.
Call me anytime, send me an email, and then, let's get together and have lunch the next time I'm in Palm Springs. I love
that. I love that. All right, Jamie, you don't go anywhere. Guys, we will see you on the next episode. Make sure you go get the book. Check out the show notes for all the information on how to go take the quiz. This is going to be valuable information for so many people, and I cannot wait to. And do this. Share this with somebody. I don't care who it is. Somebody needs to hear this. So share this episode, and let's help as many people as humanly possible. All right, guys, love you, and we'll see you next week. Hey, before you go, I'd just like to say thank you again for listening to the Thrive Forever Fit podcast and watching on YouTube. It means the absolute world to me. And if you would do me one favor, and that is simply subscribe and review this podcast on whatever platform it is that you enjoy it on, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, doesn't matter. I would absolutely be so grateful and so thankful if you do that for me. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you again next week with an awesome, awesome episode. Bye.